Okay, Nikki again, and I just hit stop on my last video that was personal experience, not to be used as medical advice, and this is part 2 of this. I'm telling my C-factor story and kind of how I came to be where I am. So this is part 2. So I did get hooked. I did begin testing like all the time. And I did start to see really big C-factors when my blood sugars were up, and I started to see low ones when my sugars were low. It was enough that I was able to see that there was some kind of relationship. And I began to come up with a theory, and it was that if I know 5.5 is me, it's stable. And I know that when my blood sugar is high, I'm a 6 or 8 or whatever, and then low, I'm a 4 or a 3. Then it must mean at 5.5 I'm stable, 6 means I'm rising and going in that direction, and a 3 means I'm falling and dropping and going lower. So I'm trying to keep with this a little bit. Bear with me. That was my early summary. It appeared to give direction rather than just the stagnant number that which you got from your blood glucose, from your BG. My BG, it's obviously a great number, but alone, I don't know what's happening in the background. So if I see a 120, I spent, I don't know how many hours of my life pre-treating for a 120 because I've been afraid it means I'm dropping. What I was starting to learn at this time was that a 120 is half the information, and a 120 with the calibration factor of a 6, you're not in danger of dropping at this moment. In fact, you're beginning to climb a little bit, or you've been climbing a little bit, but that is kind of your potential. But at the time, I didn't necessarily get all of that. I just knew that there seems to be a connection, and I'll tell you what my thinking was at the time. That if a 5.5 were my C-factor at stable, then above a 5.5 meant that I was rising, below meant I was falling. So a 100 and a 6 was climbing, a 100 and a 5 was falling, and a 100 and a 5.5 meant I was even. That would imply movement, that would imply direction, and as the C-factor could climb, because I could see these big C-factors, it would also imply even rates. This is what I was thinking at the time. Which would enable prediction. And who doesn't love some prediction when you've got wacky blood sugars? So I knew, or I thought, what my blood sugar was about to do. That sounded great. I got really, really excited, made 13 more videos. Except that after posting videos, I saw that it only held true part of the time. So frustrated again. I began testing more. I now have a Facebook page, a 670G Facebook group, kind of small, intimate, very quiet. And the other day I asked them about how often they test their sugars and what were they willing to do, their blood sugar, and people were like, I test 3 times a day. And so I toned it down, and I was telling them a little of this background, and I said, well, at the most, I tested about 40 times a day. That was an underestimate. That was a lie, is what it was. It was a lie. And I think I got up as much as 60 times a day because I was trying to track my calibration factors. So that in and of itself became this very emotional ordeal for me, because I'm like, here I was getting this amazing control with all of these frustrating numbers and testing. I mean, my fingertips were numb. And all I could think was, is this worth it? Like, what is this and what am I doing with my life? But, and I had another cup of coffee. But anyway, it was the only way I could understand the calibration factor. And the more I tested, the more frustrating it got. Every time I saw a factor that looked like it was a good predictor, it just wouldn't do what I thought, or it would turn too fast, or whatever it was. And I understood there was something wrong with it, yet so many of them worked. I've said frustrated 12 times. Okay. The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off, pardon the language. But that's, I think, very true. And I was ticked at this time. It didn't make sense the way it did in the beginning. And again, looking back, I realized that I went from these really stable blood sugars to these blood sugar swings. And that was where this big difference came in. And I was trying to, accommodate and understand and adjust and do whatever you do as diabetics. And understand. Okay. This method, as does auto, truly loves a stable blood sugar, and it's really easy with a stable blood sugar. The swings make it tricky. I also learned around this time that a big calibration factor, here I am to kind of my old theory, a big calibration factor must fall back through and pass back through before going in the other direction. So, okay, so I just jumped there and I'm sorry. Basically, I told you what I was thinking about rate and direction, but what I would see then is if this were rate and direction and I had a blood sugar over 100 and a calibration factor of a 6.4, then that must mean I'm rising, and I'm rising pretty fast. But then what would happen is the next time I would have a 103 and a 6.2, and that could not be rate and direction. So that was the next stage and where I was with understanding the calibration factor, and it was yet another frustrating stage because I'm like, if it's not rate and direction, then what is it, and why does it work some of the time? And I began to understand its limitations. I didn't know why there were limitations, but I understood that a 6.4 and a 6.2 they didn't both have the same meaning. I thought what goes up must come down. This is now a spectrum, and you have to pass through all these numbers, and maybe that's what it is. And then I began to understand that a 6.4, if a 6.4 is where you test, that yes, that does mean you're rising, but a 6.2 can be your next number. I know what it means. I'm just trying not to get, what goes up, which meant it could be, okay, scratch that. What I figured out was that a 6, it's all relative. And if you're at a 6.4 and your next one's at a 6.2, that what it means is that you're beginning to turn around. So there is this potential. It is not predictive, but there is this potential. And now you can understand what your potential is. So if your calibration factor has fallen, even forget the 5.5, that one has a different meaning now. If it has fallen and it's coming back in, then now you're setting up the potential for a dropping blood sugar. That part, it took me a while to get my mind wrapped around, but I began to see that at a blood sugar of a 240, that my calibration factor could be a 7.3, a 7.5, a 7.6, a 7.2. And all the while, it was a 240. But what I understood was that it was beginning to come back. So there went my theory on rate and direction, but it definitely set the stage for it having a different kind of meaning, and that was potential. Whatever, I was ready to quit again. The whole thing was very frustrating, and I decided I needed a break. I didn't want to make any more videos. I didn't want to talk to anybody ever again, and I was done. And I didn't want to use any calculators. I didn't want to test, and that was it. Next morning, I woke up. I did my blood sugar, and it was a 150. And I'm like, what am I going to do with a 150? And I tested my calibration factor. And it was that morning that I realized that I have access to more information. And what does that 150, what is the potential? And that's when I realized this is something that's really worth working through, and I've been doing that since. But anyway, so now I understand that I can have a 150 and there can be a lot of information behind it, and that's what my calibration factor is good for. It's not rate and direction at all. It is potential. And my 150 with a C factor of a 6 might mean that I need to get my insulin a head start before I start my coffee. It's the potential for that 150 to climb pretty fast. My calibration factor with a 150, my blood sugar over 150 with a 4.2 means that the potential is to drop. So if I'm active, then I have to be aware of that. If I'm sitting around not doing anything and I'm going to just have my coffee, then it's still a 150. But it changes how I have my coffee. It changes whether or not I have a bowl of pasta or if I just have some cheese and turkey. Or, it gives you potential. And now I'm 9.5 minutes into this one. Thank you for watching. I'm going to come back for 3 and I'm going to sum it all up. And then you guys are going to think I'm crazy.